when he was a lieutenant. The chief was like a senior airman in the same squadron.
Yeah.
Ready to kick it off?
Yes.
Okay. We got good audio on the interwebs. Can you hear us? Awesome. So welcome everybody for this week's JPD. Colonel Poon from the 60th Comm Squadron is going to treat us some of his knowledge on China and the CCP and the goings on in the Pacific. So were you Lieutenant Green's AOC?
I was.
That's awesome. Such a small world. How was he?
He was a douchebag. Just no. He was perfect.
Awesome.
Just like all cadets.
Well, we appreciate you coming over, and hopefully, this kick starts, just a good relationship between our squadrons, and we can kind of spread this stuff throughout the wing. I know we got some of the other squadrons in the ops group going to be chiming in, so we appreciate your time, and I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, thanks again for hosting me, and thanks everyone for joining us on the TV. Real quick, I have my Theo right there, Major Oz, my ops flight chief right there, Senior Master Sergeant Bennett, and then my cybersecurity expert, Sergeant Terwilliger, just as a little introduction of who's in the room. So, just real quick, just set the tone. Hey, challenge me on what I'm about to tell you. Just speak up, okay? My last assignment, I was a professor, which meant I got a lot of talkback, and like I'm pretty used to that. So don't be afraid. If you're like, hey, that's BS, I know better, then tell me, because I can learn from you too. Okay. So hey, I think last time when I introduced myself, I was like over dramatized because I was like, what? I need to tell who I am and introduce the topic. Right. So I did say, hey, my dad was labeled a enemy of the state by the Communist Chinese Party. Okay. He's from a family of self-sufficient farmers, right? So in the communist system, at the bottom end, you have the poor farmers, which means you need help to feed yourself. Then you have the self-sufficient farmers, which means you don't need help, but you can't sell anything that you make either, right? And then you have the rich farmers, which means that, well, you can sell stuff, right? You make enough, you grow enough crops to sell. And then you have the merchants and blah, 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 right? So at some point, going down the pecking order, his family was declared an enemy of the people of the Communist Party. And so guess what? He had to leave, right? So his parents basically sold everything, hired a human smuggler, jumped on the boat, and went to British control Hong Kong, which is where I was born. And then in 1980, when Margaret Thatcher agreed with Deng Xiaoping to hand Hong Kong back over, my dad was like, oh shit, we gotta leave. Right, so he applied for a green card for the family when I was born. And when I was about 8 years old, a month shy, my family was granted a green card to come to the United States. When I was 16, so 8 more years, we took the oath and became a citizen by choice of this great nation. So that's kind of like my personal familiarity with the subject matter. I do not have a degree of any kind in Chinese history. I just kind of grew up with it, and I talk about it with my parents. So real quick, hey, hopefully you watched the video that was sent out, and maybe it's the first time you saw it. And I'm going to call on a couple of people real quick, but in your head, from 1 to 10, how worried are you about communist China? 1, you're not worried. 10, you're really worried. And then why, right? So I'm going to ask someone so think about that real quick. 1 to 10. 1, I'm not worried. 10, I'm really worried. Okay, got your answer. Why is that? Now, who's got a 1 that would like to share? Or 2? 3. Come on. 3.
I got a 3. I'll say not worried due to the population. I think they're getting pretty old, and they've got a time that they are able to capitalize while their population is still young. I'm gonna counter this with, however, they are kind of putting a lot of their financial backing into technology to be able to beat us financially against, that offense defense. So I would say that's a little bit more towards the worry, but still think population makes me less worried.
Yeah, 1.3 billion people, right? Compared to the United States with 330 million people. But shrinking, right? Because of the one-child policy, you can only have one kid, generally, unless you're a party elite, then you can have multiple. And for sterilization and stuff like that. So yeah, their population is going down from 1.3 billion. Cool. So how about a 10? Who's super worried? 9, please.
So I said I'm 9. After watching the video, that's the second time I've seen that video. But I would say I'm worried because of their intellect and their ability to innovate, and also the ways and forms of espionage that they perform. I read an article about how they infiltrated the C-17 modeling and also with Sony, so corporate espionage and their ways of getting information, and also just innovating and thinking outside the box with making new islands to try to assert their dominance. So they're assertive and they're also innovative.
Yeah, right. So you've only 1% of your population is innovative, right? Compared to our 1% of 330 million, which is what, 1 million innovators. A 1.3 billion has 10 million innovators, right? And at some point, maybe that becomes a problem, right? So I just want to start off with that and keep that in mind. We don't really have the slides, right? So, which is okay. So we're going to start with like the big picture of. So what I think, real quick, this is not a force on force discussion on who's going to win tomorrow if we fight, because a lot of that stuff is at the TS level on like what we know they have, what we are able to do. This is more about a cultural understanding of why they think they do and how they see the world, right? And that, in some ways, that's how you predict an adversary's action, is by understanding how they think. Okay. So we'll start with big Chinese history, then we'll go down to the Communist Chinese Party, then we'll go down to the People's Liberation Army, which is their armed forces, then we'll go down to the last one, Target Travis. Target Travis is a term that General Van Vost have used herself when she visited here and spoke to the squadron commanders. So we'll kind of try to funnel that, if that makes sense, right? So we'll who knows Chinese history? By just real quick, no one? That's okay. So if you study, or when you study Western culture and Western military strategy or international relations, you start with Thucydides, right? You start with the Peloponnesian War. This is when Athens and Greeks were fighting for dominance, and then you have Athens and Sparta was fighting for dominance in Greece, right? And then you have the Persians coming in, right? Like the movie 300. Right? So a lot of our thinking comes from that period. It's when an established power and a rising power, when the rising power rises, it means they will fight. Right? That's part of the Thucydides trap. That's a very academic term. It's a very Western perspective, right? And it's happened, basically it's been applied to all our histories, right? The last, I think, peaceful transfer without combat was when the British handed power over to the Americans, to us. And I want to caveat, sometimes I will take on the persona of the Communist Chinese Party and I will say us and they like in backward terms. I will try to catch myself on that because I'm a loyal American. So that's where we draw our analogies from. And it's a really strong analogy because it's all over our academic materials, it's all over our magazines that, hey, China's rising, that means the US is gonna fight it, or we need to make room for it. And then you'll see this thing called power transition theory, which basically says we can't fight China, We don't really want to fight a land war in China, so we just need to make room for them, right? That's part of the Western theory of how we see the conflict and the competition. So does that apply to how they see the world? The answer is no, because, well, they didn't grow up in the West. They didn't grow up in the West. They didn't have that period, right? Now, what the crazy thing is, at about the same time in history, they have this thing called the spring and autumn period. This is when, and this goes all the way back to like 400 BCE, before Common Era. So instead of a rising power fighting established power, Sparta and Athens, how China was organized at that time was a bunch of feudal city-states, kind of like Greece, but they were all following the same code and kind of following the same structure due to marriages and genealogy, right? So when they have a huge population boom, they send the son of the king out and they will populate that area, right? And then that son maintains the network with the whole, not empire, but the whole system, right? It's called an order at that time, the Zhao order. It's not quite an empire yet, right? That time, the Zhao order was basically crumbling, right? It's been so long that there are no like familial ties anymore between all the little kings, all the lords. So they started fighting for power, right? So what ended up happening is that one conquered everything, right? So there were 200 plus kingdoms, and in the end there was one kingdom, right? So what the story is, it started out with a very poor kingdom on the outskirts of China at that time, and conquering the whole thing, right? This is the analogy they use when seeing competition with the West. This is in their literature, not our literature. So their literature, they see, using their historical analogy, the world order is set up by the United States, just like the world order is set up by the Zhao dynasty back then, is crumbling. And everyone is going to fight for a piece of the pie, right? And the poor nation on the outskirts of the world, of China back then, is the one that conquers it all at the end. Right? So it's not quite a direct confrontation, rising power meets established power and fight for dominance, which is how our perspective is. Their perspective is there's always going to be a dominant power. And at some point, that dominant power will crumble, and then there will be a free fall. And so they have to situate themselves in order to be the winner of this, of the world, basically, right? So their point of view is not a China versus the US, that's our view, right? Their view is the US world order is crumbling, there's going to be a new one, we will be it. Hopefully that makes so it's not quite computational, it's the main point. Does that make sense? Yeah. Right. So going, the second thing in Chinese history that is the main point to think about is cyclical thinking, that things happen in cycles. In the West, we think of linear thinking, cause and effect, A goes to B, right? We have a creation myth in our religion, and then a end of time myth in our religion, right? There's nothing like that in Asia, or in that part of Asia. There's no creation myth in the historical Chinese religion. There's no end time because it's cyclical. And in some ways, you may have heard of, in Buddhism, there's you reborn, right? The cycle, right? So when they think of the cycle, they think of their history. They have a period of order, followed by a period of chaos, followed by a period of short order, followed by a period of long order, chaos, short order, long order, chaos, short order, long order, chaos. Right? So if we were to pull up a historical timeline of Imperial China, and you look at the dynasties, you'll see civil war, long periods, like 200-300 years of civil war chaos, followed by one person that unifies it but rules it for like 10-15 years. And then you have a long period of stability of one dynasty that rules it for like 400 years. And then chaos. One person to put it together for like 15 years, and then one long period, right? So Han Chinese is the dominant ethnic group. I am genetically, I guess, Han Chinese. And that is basically the first long period of order, the Han dynasty, which is where most people think of. So for the Communist Chinese Party, they're hoping that to be the long order, and that the chaos was kind of the what they call the century of humiliation plus World War II, and then there was this short order under the Republic of China, which this squadron actually has a huge history with, if you didn't know, right? So your patch, your donkey carrying over the hump is a World War II heritage where you were carrying supplies to the Republic of China, which is the Kuomintang, that's the name of the political party and the political order at that time. They fled to Taiwan and it's now the Taiwanese government, basically, right? But so thinking of cycles, right? They're hoping that now that their turn, Communist Chinese think it's hoping it's the long order for their reign. So cyclical thinking instead of linear thinking. Okay, not quite. So that's the second point. Then the third point about Chinese culture thinking is this thing called horizontal thinking versus vertical thinking. So this comes from our language. We write English horizontally, left to right. So we think of the world kind of like, so when we think of the army domain or the army, it's the land domain or the water, like it's very horizontal-ish. Chinese writing goes from upper right down and it goes left. So it goes like this. So this is horizontal thinking. So this is about how people naturally think of the world, okay? So when you, and this is how it applies. When we translate the word China into Zhonggao, which is Middle Kingdom, think of, how do you picture that? Try to picture Middle Kingdom. Someone tell me what they're thinking of.
They're basically
the center of the world.
They're center of the world.
Center of the world, yeah, right? So you imagine like a nation in the middle and then a bunch of other nations around it, like the center of the world. Is that what you were thinking of? Whoever that was?
Yes.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's what most people would think, right? Because that's horizontal thinking, that's how we think. So vertical thinking is up and down, right? So the Middle Kingdom actually conceptually, if interpreted correctly, means the kingdom between the heaven and the ground. It's not horizontal. It's everything between heaven, the sky, and everything to the ground. So if we were to say JADC to join all domain command and control, we think of that as what, linking the flying platform to the ship, to the truck, right? Being able to communicate between all military equipment, right? But that's not how they initially interpret our writing, right? So we can tell, so a lot of this is, they study us, they generate a report, we go and grab the report and see what they thought about us, right? It goes back and forth. There's a lot of this stuff going on, right? So when we publish Joint All Domain Command and Control, they originally thought global operations, not linking different elements of the forces together, but about global warfare. And that's just part of what horizontal thinking is versus linear thinking. Just a small piece, it's an example. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes some sense. And maybe a lot of this is gee whiz knowledge, but it's a start, hopefully, of the conversation And hopefully I'm giving you enough where I interest you and you will go do more research, because trying to cram 1 hour of civilization studies is dangerous, full of overgeneralization and pitfalls, right? Because of that reason. Okay. That's kind of the 3 main points for foundations. Is that
So, sir, in terms of the Middle Kingdom piece, and is that something that the current regime, all the way from Deng Xiaoping, are trying to learn from, right? They're trying to not be that isolated kind of Middle Kingdom, and that's the reason for all the opening up the economy.
so? They're opening up the economy is because they know they were poor, and that they needed to get rich. Can you rephrase the question, please?
So, I guess let me back it up to your 1 to 10, right? I was more like a 9,
Mhm.
and I don't know if you read this yet.
Okay.
That brought me down to more of a 3 and a 4, just because of the globalization, and I think the rest of the world would not accept both countries kind of fighting over each other. So unless there was a strategic mistake, right, where one of our planes shoots one of their planes down and vice versa. And this author makes the point that the whole Middle Kingdom thought led to that humiliation for the Chinese people, and that's why
I see.
Deng kind of opened up the economy, trying to learn from that.
So are you talking about when they closed up, right? So they closed up like in the 15th century under the Ming Dynasty. Another long stability Ming, you probably might have heard of it, since a lot of restaurants are Ming. There's a Ming Dynasty restaurant in Sacramento.
I haven't been to that one yet.
Huh?
I haven't been to that one yet. Love it.
Anyways, no, so part of the thought at that time in the 15th century was, hey, they traveled all over the world, right? They went to Africa, they went to North America, they saw nothing but barbarians. There's nothing for the world to offer. The only thing left to fight is the civilized world, the Middle Kingdom, right? Basically, from heaven to the earth, there is still this geographic area that they call China, and everything beyond it is wasteland. There's nothing in Africa. They didn't physically reach Europe or anything like that. But I think they went as almost to the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. And then there were some findings in North America, but what's there at that time? Like nothing, right? No nomadic Indians. So the decision was there's nothing out there to fight over or to get. So the only thing the powers that be, well, then the only thing to fight for is the throne. Right? So that's when they started closing their borders, closing up from the outside world. One more time, please, the question. I'm sorry.
No, it's a complicated, very complicated
Yeah.
subject, right? So I guess we can kind of segue into kind of the economic discussion,
Uh-huh.
right? Where it seems like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, everybody thinks, when we think of communism, we think of like the Soviet Union,
Mhm.
we think hammer and sickle.
Yep.
Whereas China, has very much opened its economy. Even though Chinese can't own land, there's certain restrictions, of course. They have a burgeoning startup scene. There's a lot of entrepreneurs in China.
Yeah.
So kind of that interconnectedness is, do you think that will ever cause the Chinese Communist Party to ever kind of reach its tentacles outside and be kind of a colonialist, if you, for lack of a better term? I know the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative is something they're pushing.
Yeah.
Open airports and using their economic power and might to exchange construction for long-term leases.
Yeah, and right, at some point, we're going to move from historical facts and kind of interpretation to historical facts to conjecture, which is kind of where we're about to head to, right? Do I think the tentacles is going to basically prevent a fight, right? No, I don't. In fact, I personally, to be upfront, I believe we will fight. but not for economic reasons, but because of cultural reasons, right? And to foreshadow, I believe they will seek a fight in order to correct a historical wrong. This is about establishing their internal propaganda have said, I cannot forgive what your grandfather did to my grandfather. This is about the Western nations have raped China, and as a rape victim, the only justice I can seek is with violence. That since I got kicked in the balls when I was down, I will have to seek justice when there is no international courts of any kind. I will have to victimize the victim, or victim, the perpetrator, I should say, right? I have to hit back in order to gain back a sense of dignity, right? So personally,
Well, now I'm back at 9.
huh?
That was quick.
I'm sorry?
Now I'm back at 9 on your scale of 1 to 10.
So it's not an economic thing. Like I believe it's based on it's kind of honor, but it's a sense of victimhood, which is the words they use, right? A lot of what I've based my analysis on is what they teach their kids. High school textbooks, history textbooks are important. And unlike the US, where we have a crap ton of history books in schools because no one can agree on one narrative, right? So we have a lot of freedom of information. In communist China, there's one narrative, and the one narrative is that we were humiliated by the Western powers. We were weak, and only the Communist Party can make us great again. That started in 1989. Right? So can I move a little bit? Maybe that'll help. And we can answer the economic, get back to the economic piece, what that means. What I think it means, right? Conjecture, there are historical facts that we are kind of almost done with. That drives a Eastern type of thinking. But so hey, China was great, right? Invented the printing paper, invented the printing press, the removable type, money, gunpowder, magnet, all that stuff. Envy of the world at that time for what they know. Right? They really envy of the world, right? The Roman Empire didn't have that kind of engineering capability. And then they closed in on themselves and basically fought each other for a long time until the Western powers came and divided up, colonized the world. Right? So they fully colonized India, and the Chinese would say that they were almost fully colonized by the Western powers, but really the Western powers just came in and divided up and conquered. The Americans were part of that a little bit. We were part of the fleet that burned down the Summer Palace. Right? So think of when the British burned down the White House. What did we do? We rebuilt the White House. Right? So when we, Western powers plus the United States, burned down the Summer Palace, what did they do? They memorialized it, and it is a museum piece to remember that we suffered at the hand, Chinese suffered at the hands of the white people, and it is full of racial language. Okay, just to be clear on that. So, and they have National Day, National Day of Humiliation. It was September 16 or something. It's on my slides. You see it. It's on my slide, right? That's when they remember. It's not a celebration, but it's kind of like a holiday, right? Remember being humiliated by the West, including Japan and the United States, and their job is to make China great again. Donald Trump was not the first person to say make something great again. Deng Xiaoping said that after the student protests in Tiananmen Square in 1989. So recent history, the Communist Party took over China after World War II. Our friends, the Nationalist Party, went to Taiwan and is still there, right? So think of, hey, if the South lost the Civil War and went to Cuba and is still a government in Cuba, like what do we think of that? right? That's how the Communist Party think of the Kuomintang, or the mainland China, Communist China think of Taiwan, right? The Civil War is still going on, man. It's just over there. We haven't fought in 60 years. But if the Confederacy went to Cuba and settled on top of it. That's the analogy. Shit, what was someone remind me where I was.
So do you think the Chinese have been building up, their defense industrial base to go beyond Taiwan, to go beyond, because Japan, right, is one of the big offenders when you say the West?
Yes.
Do you think that they are looking to go beyond Southeast Asia? Obviously, there's timeline involved there, but what's your opinion on that?
So opinion conjecture, right, is you don't need to physically conquer everyone to control everyone, right? So one of the things they learned from the United States and believe they have learned from the United States is you control other countries through international institutions like the United Nations, the World Bank, the monetary funds, like all these things that we have created after World War II to set up the global order is a way to control other countries. So they can control other countries without physically taking over them. Right, that's one of the lessons. But then going back to their historical example, where one poor nation or kingdom conquered the whole empire, right? Physically, it's possible. Would they go beyond it? I think it's hard. There's too many other things, right? One of the things that make the unification of China possible was all the nations were, well, one, it's a land country. There was no separations of water or distance. Distance was pretty easy to get at, right? It's just like Fairfield trying to conquer San Francisco. You can go over there, right? So that means the borders were porous. The people look alike. They all speak similar languages, right? So there was a lot of, it's a lot easier to try to make that into a whole than to like, hey, can China conquer India and actually rule it? That's a very different question. Right? I think they can influence it and limit it, right? So one of the, you had a question?
Mhm.
So one of the big documents that came out of that period is Sun Tzu, The Art of War, right? And just like the Indian strategists of that time, it relies on the crumbling of your opponent's government before making the strike, which is all about influencing, sowing distrust, making the populace not trust their government, therefore they're weak. And then if you need to, then you can physically conquer it, or realize that that government is collapsed anyways, so whatever they can do is contain, right? So containment and entrapment is a big term in Chinese strategy. It goes all the way back to Sun Tzu. In fact, that's one of the big differences when we talk about military strategy or diplomatic strategy. We think of seek and destroy. We go out and find the enemy target and kill it. Their term is lure, entrap, destroy. Right? They don't naturally think of seek and destroy. They think of lure them out, entrap, and destroy. Right? And if you look at like our scenario, the South China Sea, holy crap, we have to go to the fight, and they are already receiving us. Right? So like, it fits not just in their current military strategy, but like historically all the way back, right? Wow, where are we going?
It's great, love it.
I mean, I can go on for, right? This, if you go to ACSE or IDSE, like you can take a full semester on strategies with Communist China, right? So several times I've tried to put that into like a 3-hour block with several classes, and now like we're trying to do it in like one, right? So we're gonna move to 90 pieces, and if you have a specific topic you want to talk about, let's do it, because I'd rather you talk talk about what you want to talk about. Okay, so talking about military strategies, so I guess we're jumping over the map a little bit. Generally, if I have the slides, it kind of guides the discussion, but hey, they know about the OODA loop, right? They know that their OODA loop sucks and will not go any faster. It is as fast as they can get, and it is super slow. So if they were to fight us, then they have to slow us down, right? So a lot of their capabilities, their offensive capabilities, is aimed to slow us down. Right? They know they can't break the OODA loop. They know they can't go faster themselves, so their only hope is to slow us down. And there are many ways that they think they can slow us down. Just keep that in the back of mind. Going back to the whole Sun Tzu strategy and the Indian strategist about crumbling the state from within, the concept, if you look it up, is called the fifth column. The fifth column. And the fifth column is not, it goes beyond saboteurs and spies. The fifth column is referred to a population in your adversary's state that holds a view that is favorable to you. So if I'm the United States, I would look at maybe the population in Hong Kong, or the population in Xinjiang, the Muslims, or the population in Tibet as my fifth column. Because if any trouble comes, I can try to get the Tibetans and the Muslims and those in Hong Kong to fight the communists, right? So the fifth column is a concept where it is the purposeful creation of a friendly force inside the enemy's territory. Not just one or two saboteurs is fine. Okay? Now they do this to us a lot. My parents are primary targets. Right? So the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, has a huge department of propagandists focusing on ex-nationals, not expats, right? They, like my dad doesn't want to go back. He's an enemy of the state, sort of. But they have a whole propaganda arm dedicated to folks like my parents, to convince them to vote a certain way, to buy a certain product, to speak a certain way, right? And the question is, does China, care for Donald Trump? The question is, it depends on when time it was. Right? Looking at their propaganda channels, sometimes they were like, yeah, you should support Donald Trump, and sometimes it's like you should, and it's because like they don't know. And how does this propaganda happen? It happens at like Chinese restaurants, right? So my parents is a native, they're native Chinese. They speak Chinese and read Chinese. They do English too. But guess what? When they go to a Chinese restaurant, they see those free newspapers right there. Who pays for those? They're free. The Communist Chinese Party does. Legally, through the United States, it's buying ads, right? It's like they're buying ads in the Wall Street Journal or buying ads in whatever newspaper outlet. And over time, it just eats at you. And you don't know it. Propaganda is very subtle. And it changes your thinking, right? Because the thinking they really care about is, hey, China is weak. Only the CCP can make it great again. That's one. Two, CCP is China. China is Chinese. Those three are interlinked. Therefore, if you're against the Communist Chinese Party, you're against China and you're against Chinese people. Then you're a racist. Right? I'm Chinese. If I eat that really hard for a long time, then I cannot be against the Communist Chinese Party. Right? So those are like the two main propaganda narratives is, hey, we were weak. So that's why you see celebrations of humiliation and stuff. And then you see celebrations of how Communist Chinese Party is making it great again. So that's one side, and then the other side is to intermix the terms of CCP, China, and being Chinese. So when like Pompeo 2-3 weeks ago like tried to separate those three things out, like we got a strong response from their foreign correspondents, right? From their ambassador, that any attempts to separate the Communist Chinese Party from the Chinese people will be met with hostility or something like that. Because that's one of their main push. They're trying to make the terms. Anyways, holy crap. I think before we go back to the economic piece, hopefully you remember a term called military operations other than war. Yes, I see some nods, right? Military operations other than war. Can someone give me an example of that, please?
Yeah, they can.
Goods delivered by us, right? Like when the tsunami happened, right? We flew a bunch of beds, beans, and no bullets to wherever, right? Instead of goodwill, right? So if that's our thinking, which has evolved to like gray zone conflict, their thinking is this: it's not military operations other than war; it's non-military war operations. Think about this real quick. If we can write this down and think about it in your head, military operations other than war is what we think about. They want to go with non-military war operations. Someone think about what that means. Give me an example. Hearts and minds. Hearts and minds, yeah. Okay.
Sir, one thing I can think of is Chinese intervention in Korean War in 1950. That as North Koreans were pushed against the Yalu River by the UN force, Chinese, instead of sending their regular troops to fight against the US, they call them volunteer force. That hey, these people of China volunteer to support our communist friend of North Korean to fight against the US aggressors. And even these days, they don't even call the Korean War as Korean War. They call it as anti-American supporting a movement or something like that. So I think that's one of the examples that I can think of as the military operation, non-military operation, but it's a war.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? So they, in what we term as the Korean War and Vietnam also, they basically dressed up a bunch of people in non-military outfits, but they carry out war operations. Right? They fought and killed our brothers and sisters, our fellow troops, disrupted supply lines, and oppressed the South Koreans or South Vietnamese. They do that nowadays too. The Russians do it too, right? You hear the little green men, and when we talk about China, we refer to the little blue men.
Same thing with the fishermen.
Right. But think more broadly, right? Non-military war operations, please. You too.
Corporate espionage.
Corporate espionage, right? What else?
Well, the way it's worded to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds more all-encompassing instead of just like a combined event of an entire country and entire people pushing towards one goal, rather where the U.S. is wording it, it's one entity doing separate things. It's more everybody coming together, pushing it towards one goal. So like all these different examples that have been said, different parts of the same whole, pushing towards the same objective as like a non-military war.
Yeah.
So I think everybody was together, so like your local fishing shop, your baker, things spread propaganda, your farmer, whatever, they're all working together as a whole collective, rather than one entity pushing towards separate things.
Yeah. Right. It's more encompassing. Go ahead, please.
They've done a pretty decent job of developing their Blue Water Navy in non-military operations and giving aid to the East Coast of Africa. And so they're assisting East Africa under the guise of, hey, we need to really figure out if we can have a Blue Water Navy and be able to support our guys over a couple different oceans.
Yeah. No, that's exactly. Right. It's about thinking beyond, hey, if war is the continuation of politics per Clausewitz, if that's Western thinking, right? For them, politics is war. It's not war is a continuation of politics. Politics is war. Right?
You say that using, say, like real estate and things like that, they would be above buying up real estate and buying up all that stuff to, so now they own it and they can do what they want with it if they choose.
Yeah, so if they buy the ports to the United States shipyard, if they bought a United States shipyard, they own it. Per our legal codes, they can do whatever they want, including not build that U.S. warship or not let it dock, right? So there's a term for this. It's lawfare. This is using our laws against us, right? Because our law says, if you own the shipyard, if you own this property, you can do with it as you please. So they come in and buy it, and then maybe, if conflict happens, they'll be like, no, you can't. I own it. I'm not letting you, right? Now, if at what scenario do you think the U.S. government is going to be like, no, we're not a law-abiding citizen. You can't do this, right? That's why you see a lot of news about not letting them buy these things, right? To prevent a future scenario where they would deny us our own assets. But this is about, but it has the same effect as blowing it up. If you buy it and you own it and you deny your adversary from using it, it is the same thing as blowing it up. Right? It's useless, right? I mean, what do we blow up? In World War II, we blew up ball bearing factories, we blew up POL, right? If you bought up and you control the oil supply in the Middle East, can you say, hey, I'm not going to ship that to the United States? Yeah. Until the United States come and like conquer it, right? Now, due to fracking, we are now self-sufficient, so that's not like a problem in that sense, right? But so one of the things that they published is called Unrestricted Warfare. This is a book written by two colonels at that time, now a two-star. Now, remember, their military is part of this Communist Party, not the government. So it has a lot more meaning when you're a two-star. I mean, two-star has meaning to us, but it has a whole lot more for them. So they wrote this book called Unrestricted Warfare, published in, I think, 1998, about the problems of the United States and how to destroy it or conquer it or defeat it is really the term, not destroy it or conquer it, defeat it. And the thing they pointed out is the United States is focusing on this military operation other than war. They're really good at blowing things up. Look what happened in Desert Storm. Look at what happened in all these things. But really, they don't get this non-military war operations. That they don't realize that the United States do not realize that a financial destroying the financial system has the same effect, right? Withdrawing a whole bunch of capital from the financial system has the same effect as blowing something up. Right? The United States does it, but the United States does it unintentionally and uncoordinated. Right? And so the goal of the CCP is to coordinate all these instruments of national power, because it's non-military war operations. The goal is, politics is war. You're fighting it already all the time. Just because you're not blowing things up doesn't mean you're not fighting. Okay? So it talks about patents, patent warfare, legal warfare. Right? If you own the patent, then I'm using your law saying that you can't replicate it, right? Right? Technically, so if I patent the COVID vaccine under international law, and I don't let you use the patent per your law, you cannot use it, right? There's also germ warfare. There's plague warfare is a huge one. So this thing was published in '89, and guess what? Like Bin Laden was mentioned like 20 times in this document, and it is read. It is a mandatory read in their PME. '89, we were not talking about Bin Laden, and all their leaders were. Right? Terrorism is a non-military war operation. Right? It cost how much to blow up the two Twin Towers, and how much money did we spend trying to fix that? It's not proportional, close to proportional. Right? To them, they see that as a weakness that they can exploit in the United States. Comments? Please.
I think this is what I was getting at in the beginning with like offense versus defense and losing that financial battle. It's gonna cost us X amount of billions of dollars to be able to, get an aircraft carrier. I mean, how much money is it gonna cost them to be able to have an anti-ship missile or hundreds of thousands of anti-ship missiles to be able to defeat that? Or how much is that gonna cost?
Yeah, I mean, it's not proportional, right? One ballistic missile will blow up, one ballistic missile, maybe $10 million, will blow up our United States, $10 billion aircraft carrier with 5,000 lives on board. It's not proportional, right? So what happens if we fight? The Navy is not going to sail their ship. They don't want to lose it. It's too expensive. So they just neutralized a threat without shooting. Kind of like in our Desert Storm scenario, the Iraqis won't turn on their radar sites because they know the moment they turn it on, the HIMARS is coming in and blowing it up. Right? It happened in World War II. Bismarck, the USS Bismarck, the German battleship Bismarck and the Japanese battleship Yamato, they were too big and they became sitting duck targets for the Americans, for us. So what did they do? The Germans and Japanese kept it in port because they don't want to lose it. But they still spend billions on it. Okay. So part of their propaganda arm is to encourage the development of bigger ships and buy more aircraft carriers. Because they believe when the push comes to shove and we fight, we won't use them because we're worried about losing them. And guess what? Navy's about to buy them.
So with the talk about the Navy,
the Air Force too, right? By the way.
But we have a national security strategy. We have our government as a model, like everybody understands to a certain degree, right? Like how decisions are made. Well, who's steering the ship for China?
Oh, no. For the United States?
No, for the Chinese people and the PLA. They have a president, they have a government, but is there president that one person that's steering the ship, or is it more of a collective? And how is it different than our government?
So who steers the ship in an authoritarian government, right? The leader has a whole lot of say, but it's not North Korea, right? North Korea has a cult of personality on the family, the Kim family, and it's all about protecting the Kim family and their god, blah, blah, blah. Right? Communist China, the Communist Chinese Party is the apparatus, that is the ruler, right? You still have the first among equals, like Deng Xiaoping and now Xi Jinping. So like he's driving a lot of the ship, but the thing is, it's a cultural issue. So when for 40 years now, they started doing this national education about, hey, we've been humiliated, we were weak, only the Communist Party can get us stronger. We need to seek right historical wrongs. What are those historical wrongs? We were lead in science. We are not lead in science anymore. We were the biggest economy in the world. We're not the biggest economy in the world. We were the biggest military in the world. We're not the biggest, right? All these things. So when you drill that into your kid's head over time, then you will personally, I believe, do your part. You will be a patriot and you will be a good Chinese person because you will support the Communist Chinese Party and right the historical wrongs as told to you by your leaders, because you were told that you cannot forgive what your grandfather did to my grandfather or grandmother to my grandmother.
So follow on, does that explain the expansion and or like the mindset of South China Sea, landing on the dark side of the moon, owning ports in Africa, all these movements, if you will, posturing towards ambition, or righting the wrong, or to be the hegemon.
Right, so there are two ways to look at this, and I'll start with a good way to look at it. Because you don't want to think of your enemy or adversary as dumb, right, or bad, or just bad people. Right? Everyone sees themselves as good people to their own culture and ethical values. Hey, they got a 1.3 billion population that needs work. For the last 20, 30 years, we, the world, have watched them build their cities from the dirt to skyscrapers. They have like 40 some major cities. That's a lot of construction workers that are unskilled construction workers. So now that you finish building your own country, what are you going to do with them so that they don't become a problem for you? You go build somewhere else. And oh wait, we can charge them, extra money for it, right? So in a way, you can look at their perspective as, hey, how do I employ all these people? Because the state still has responsibility, a lot more than we do, to employ the citizenry of the people, right? So once I'm communist China, I finished building all my cities and I still got 1 billion unemployed construction workers that aren't ready to get educated and move into the digital economy. I need to give them something to do so they didn't hurt me, right? Oh, Sri Lanka is a great site to build a port, and they're willing to let me build a port. Okay, I'll build you a port. Are you willing to take this interest rate? Cool. That's awesome. Money speaks. And they imported all the Chinese workers instead of using local workers. Right? This is the Belt and Road Initiative. Right? One of the problems that we complain about is they don't help the local economy because they bring the Chinese workers out. It's at high interest rates. It's payday loan. It is a payday loan. Right? But look, why wouldn't you do it? Right? I got to employ my people. I don't care about employing Sri Lankans or Djiboutians or however you want to call them. Right? So from their perspective, like as a bureaucracy, they need to employ people, and this Belt and Road Initiative is a great way to go about it. Right? As they slowly educate their construction workforce to try to get them into the digital economy, it's a stepping stone. Right? And then you got the militants part of the Communist Chinese Party come in and say, hey, we can use this. Right? Hey, we can start setting up these deep water ports in case something happens. And we can follow in the footsteps of the Western powers back in the 1500s and how they colonized the world. We'll just use their playbook. They did it to us. We can do it to them because we're strong. Right? So the decision making, I mean, I think a lot of it comes from the original decision to emphasize the century of accumulation, and it's how they stay in power. We'll make China strong again. And because of that, it's kind of like a self-flaking ice cream cone, and then people will get more extreme and extreme, right? And I personally think we'll fight soon, and I think there's a lot of estimates, right? If there was no political instability in the United States, that opens a window of opportunity for them. I personally believe it'll be like 50s or 60s. Because, well, I already told you, culturally, they will want to fight. They will want to right that last historical wrong. I'd say 50s and 60s because generationally, all the people that have experienced weakness have died away. Right? So by the 50s and 60s, everyone that's in the top leadership of the military, of the government, even the middle level of the military and government, will have only experienced wealth and power and being respected across the world. And then you're fed that you're supposed to not forgive what your grandfather did to my grandfather. Then I believe they will seek that last revenge. But that's conjecture. And so like the economy part comes back to it, right? It's non-military war operations is how they see the economic arms. And we don't have someone that really focuses on that, right? Hopefully you saw the video of the South China Sea. the company that built those almost listed on the New York Stock Exchange, right? As an IPO, making billions, guess what? Those billions just went into building an island that if we fight, the United States will blow up, hurting your pension funds, maybe your pension funds. Well, we're not allowed to invest. Like the TSP is not allowed to like invest in Chinese state-backed companies, but other pension funds do because they see Americans' weakness is greed too. We'll let them get away with it because the lure of selling one T-shirt to 1 billion people means you can become 1 billionaire. It's too great, and greed drives us. Anyway.
So we've got about 10 more minutes left. If you want to kind of talk to us about the target, Travis.
Yeah, hey, so target Travis, we talk about big things that's going to happen. Let's go here. And we'll start with, if there's action in the South China Sea, it takes 10 days for an aircraft carrier to travel from San Diego to Japan. What can you do in 10 days, right? The Normandy invasion in World War II to establish the beachhead took 14 days, right? And that's 1940s technology to establish a beachhead. How long did it take Saddam Hussein to conquer Kuwait? 5 days. And then 43 days for us to kick him out. And then how long did it take the Russian Federation to conquer South Ossetia and parts of Georgia? 3 days. So if there is action, and we are the gateway to the Pacific, everything has to come through here. So their goal is to bottle us here. Because they don't need to stop us. They just need to delay us, right? Our OODA loop, their OODA loop won't go fast, but they just need to slow us down to the point where once they've established, doing whatever they need, because it's a lot harder to eject a force than it is, right, to prevent the conquer. Right? So if you think about non-military war operations and how they could follow Travis capabilities up, I can think of maybe, hey, can they establish some kind of bird sanctuary, pigeon farm right in the flight line's path, right? Maybe at some point the bird population will be great enough that you have to think twice about launching the aircraft, right? It's not preventing the aircraft launch, it's about slowing us down. A couple hours, a couple of days, it's all you need, right?
You do that to yourself.
Right?
You're talking about the dumps that they have on either end of the runway?
Right? Basically, this is about using our values against us, right? To bottle us up, to slow our OODA loop, right? We are shown, we are taught that military operations needs to be separated from civilian stuff, right? So we have this like, hey, dual use is not a good idea, right? We want to separate that. That's our Western code. So for them, it's let's purposely put this together, not because they think tying human shields to a tank is going to prevent it blowing up, but it's to increase the OODA loop time. It is about increasing, putting that station in a church or a hospital. It's not about preventing it from blowing up. That's what terrorists and stupid terrorists do. Their idea is to slow us down so that they can finish their objective. Right? So how do you bottle Travis up for a couple of days? You can start setting wildfires, right? A couple of dollars, right? You can go pay the homeless guy, right? Hey, go build this campfire out there and see what happens, right? Right? Because and part of the idea is they don't want to blow anything up, because what happens when you visibly blow up something in the United States?
Everyone's outraged.
You unite the parties. You unite the Democrats, the Republicans, everyone is now you join the target, right? So in their escalation ladder is to not blow something up, because they don't want us to be united, right? In fact, the most dangerous period, the most preferred optimal window is during disputed presidential election, but where it was not including an incumbent. Because then if they do something, then is the military going to be on their own willing to say, we're going to do this? And the moment they blow something up in the US, then everyone's going to be, yes, let's go get them. But if you don't, right, if they slowly build these things like expanding the wind farm or like bird sanctuary, increasing the bird population, like non-military war operations to slow down outroot. That's against the military side, right? That's what they're thinking.
Do we have any kind of national strategies or anything else that's helping combat any of this? I mean,
I don't think there is a national strategy on China. So just real quick, I want to make sure that it's not a Donald Trump thing, because the pivot to the Pacific happened in the second Obama term. So it started in the Obama term under a Democratic president. And then it ratcheted up, right? Now, would Hillary have ratcheted up like this? I don't know. Right? But it's short answer is no, that I know of. Only, I think last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, the DoD stood up the DASD for China, which is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense on China. So that's a brand new office focused on that issue. But otherwise, China is mentioned in the National Security Strategy. It's mentioned in the NDS, National Defense Strategy. The House Intel Committee released a paper two weeks ago, right when I showed up last time, saying that we don't understand the threat of China, then therefore we are not able to adequately combat it. But unified strategy, nope. That I know of. If you find it, please educate me.
Sir, I have another question. I actually have two questions. One is for their Silk Road project. So I know back in the days, Chinese built a Silk Road from China going all the way to Istanbul, like Turkey area, to sell their silk. And also during the Ming Dynasty, Zheng Hua was an explorer and a sailor back in the time that actually traveled all across the ocean, went to Africa, and basically he built a tribute state that all the countries that he visited, hey, we're making a tribute state for you guys. So they actually give us something, otherwise we're gonna break their country, break their tribe. And I know with that, in Chinese history that I learned when I grew up in Korea in high school, there was like one of the golden days of Chinese history back in the days, that this is how they were able to expand their global reach, global influence all across the world. And people around me in Korea and a lot of news media and the scholars are saying that their Silk Road project, that building a port and making a railroad and dry rail all the way going to Europe, Germany, like that, is there another attempt to build a Silk Road to bring their glorious days. And I know that as you explained, Chinese let them borrow money at a high interest rate and then use the Chinese worker, Chinese material to build their port. And because a lot of countries who borrow the money from China can't pay that back, Chinese are saying, oh, you can't pay the money back, then we're taking it for next 50 years, next 90 years. And I know one of the ports in Sri Lanka is taken over to China like that. And with that, Chinese are actually building military ports saying, oh, we're gonna protect our commercial vessels.
Yeah.
And but I know there's a lot, of like resistance going on these days. Malaysia, for example, they stopped that Silk Road project and getting money from China and let them build something. Pakistan, they started reconsidering that Chinese strategy, although Chinese are approaching them as one of best friends against India and in the region. So
you have that strong cultural and historical background. What's your speculation on their future of their Silk Road project?
So part of the Silk Road that you refer to, I believe, is CCP propaganda, because they did not build the Silk Road way back then. What they did do is build an industry that produced silk and then brought it to the borders of back then the Chinese Empire. And then guess who carried it? The Mongols and the peoples of the steppes. So if there's a road to Europe, because there are Chinese silk in the Roman Empire in Rome, then they were built by people of the steppes, not by Han Chinese or any ethnic Chinese really, but they built that industry. But I part of, so people are realizing based on just talking like this, that, hey, you're using unethical, based on Western values, unethical practices to take advantage of native populations. Yes, the West did do this way back then during the colonial days, but we realize it's bad. So learn from us that it's bad. Don't do it, right? I mean, they're taking money, they're borrowing money from the International Monetary Fund at like 2% and then loaning that money back out to whatever port at 15%, the same money, and pocketing the difference. Well, that's just using our own systems against us, and we let them happen. So are they trying to build influence through the Silk Road? I think they build influence just simply by having money and buying things up. And realizing that they can IPO a shell company and then not disclose any of the financial assets as we require them, because they then call it a national security thing, and then we don't look. And they don't let us take money out, right? If you invest money in China, you can't really get it out because they have capital flow controls, which means you can only take out so many US dollars a day, right? So let's say you invest $1,000 in communist China, and somehow magically that stock became 2,000 US dollars, and you sell it, you probably cannot get that $2,000 outside communist China. You cannot bring that back to the US. You can spend it inside communist China, right? So they've captured the capital flow on that. So it's a danger. But on their perspective, if they allow free flow of capital, that's a weapon that the United States have used against other people, right? Argentina went bankrupt because of a sudden capital flow, and they had to return to a barter system. And this was like 2006. So I don't quite remember the year, but it's recent, right? Where investors panicked and they pull out all the capitals, and then all of this overnight, the government of Argentina collapsed, and people were bartering because the peso was worth nothing, right? So in their perspective, they have to protect the capital flow to prevent that. But then for us, it's not a free and open economy. I invest money in, it's a money pit, I can't take it out.
So, and then, you know, with technology and same with kind of like capitalism, but with China having such a hold like on our technology capability, like all of us, I mean, we do everything on iPads, you know, everything's transferred through, we do, you know, all these secure applications and stuff like that. Do you think China has a way, like, I mean, they could put chips in everything that they give us and we would just never even know realistically. But do you think that there's a chance of them using that as like a way of like non-war operations?
So who's read this?
Yeah, Ghost Fleet.
That's basically what.
So if you haven't read, Ghost Fleet is a good book. In fact, for several years, we started SDE with that book, right? So the Eisenhower School and National War College and College of Information Cyberspace, the joint schools, started with a fictional account of World War III, US versus China, in which we basically lose the first round and tie the second round. Right, and it has a lot to do with the industrial base being compromised, right? That the F-35 is not actually stealth because there are like 5 different chips in there that is broadcasting, right? So it doesn't matter if the skin reflects the radar when your internal is transmitting, right? It talks about the compromises. And it's something that we have talked about. Is there a U.S. strategy for it? No. It takes a lot of time for that to come through. But does that make yeah? It's a big risk. It's called the supply chain risk management. That's the official term. But yeah, holy crap.
Yeah, so hate to wrap it up. It's such a great privilege to hear your deep insights on China. It helps us operators open up, our worldwide aperture, how we view the world. I know everybody in here at least learned one thing about the threat that is the Chinese Communist Party and how that could potentially impact us here at Travis. So, round of applause. That ends our joint professional development. Sir, if you have any final words.
So in the slide deck, I have a couple of books if you want to read. National Humiliation, if you want to understand the cultural aspect of how they decision make. Competitive Strategies for the 21st Century. Only the first 2/3 is good. But you could. But basically, this is about denial strategies and how to deny China. It's like basically, assuming we're not going to fight, how do we still outcompete and win, right? And a lot of it is Navy-centric because it's a Navy person. This is free, but you can download it because it's NDU, and I'm partial to this one because I'm in it. And then, hey, if you download the Unrestricted Warfare, the one that is required reading by them, there's an English translation. Realize the language may not be as easy. It is a translation, so there are things that may be missing from it, but it's good. It's a good read. The first half is very easy to read. It's a study of the Gulf War and stuff like that. And then the one, what is it, the 3/4 or chapter 3-ish, right? It's really hard to understand because it's got a lot of metaphors in it. Think about hey, Martin is crying wolf on China. You translate that, what does that mean? It means a lot of things because you all know what that crying wolf means. It's a whole story. So that chapter 3 is really hard because it got a lot of that. And chapter 4 is a lot easier. But so I do recommend that one because they make their people read it. Otherwise, I guess thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And, oh, awesome.